Welcome to another episode of the Washington, D.C. Comic, Science Fiction, and Fantasy Fans Fantastic Forum. I'm Ulysses Campbell, and it's a pleasure and a privilege to have you here watching us today. My panel today, we have the ever beautiful and fabulous Sherin Nicole, Mr. Bryan Lyles, who is the host and producer of the Fantasy Sports News and World Report, fabulous show you should also watch, and the GD, John Brooks, John Hex, without whom no panel would be complete. Thanks for being with us, John.
Thank you.
No name
necessary.
Yeah, but I like to mention it anyway. Today, we are talking about African Americans and their portrayals in American comics. And I am just going to start off by saying that, the brothers sometimes get the short end of the stick when it comes to comics.
Sometimes.
And it's kind of rough. I remember one of the first African American characters that I read was Luke Cage, Hero for Hire. I remember when they introduced Luke Cage.
Sweet Christmas.
Yeah, this was the thing. Some of these expressions, Christmas and sweet sister and all this. I'm like, wait a minute. We don't talk like that. It's like,
Not in public.
Yeah. But one of the other interesting things about that, even his costume. I remember he had a tiara that he wore.
Yeah, a tiara?
He had a tiara. And he had this silk shirt that was open all down. He wore a chain for a belt. And he had
tight pants, tight jeans.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness.
Yes.
Yeah, it was a heck of a thing. Far cry from the modern Luke Cage, who has become a much more popular and possibly more well-written character. But, those old Hero for Hire stories had a certain flair. I remember, I think it was Billy Graham who was the writer or the author, or the artist. But the art was pretty good, and the stories were sort of interesting. But, a lot of the characters, and they always had him coming up against some African-American or Latino villain.
Oh.
Who's usually a gangster.
Well, but even the very colorful people that he came in contact with. As far as the way they dressed. In fact, I remember there was, I think, did you ever read this thing, John? It was Big Ben Donovan, I think was the guy's name. He was sort of like a Kingpin-esque sort of character, real big brother who wore these. In fact, he was stomping Cage at one point, and he had some of those, funkadelic high heels on, and he was saying he made some reference to, but he made some reference to, I really dig these new styles, Cage. They make great weapons to use against cats like you. As he's stomping him in the head.
Wow.
I know these things stick with you.
I only read one of the old Cage books, and that was the introduction of Black Goliath as an angry ex-boyfriend.
Oh, that's right.
Came stomping out the Cage because he was dating his ex-girl.
Yeah, I forget her name, but because I always want to say Lila, but that was the Falcon's girlfriend.
Well, I've got one of my favorites, and by favorites I mean horrible, is when Punisher turned up black. You know how he woke up Negro?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I remember that.
And all of a sudden his speech changed, all his S's turned to Z's, because that's how Negroes talk.
This was sort of like Watermelon Man as Punisher.
Yeah,
I remember that.
He woke up Negro.
He escaped out of prison, had his face messed up, and he was trying to hide out. And he went to a doctor who specialized in melanin, and she turned him black as a disguise.
Melanesis. And he was Negro, but then his speech changed because apparently your whole brain, speech patterns, everything changed when your skin darkens.
And he teamed up with Cage.
Oh, it was horrible.
It was,
and
it was a
he
bad
was
time
going
for the Empire.
buck-eyed in the mirror. Oh, it was bad. I've got pictures.
It wasn't the last time a white dude was turned black in Marvel either, because when Mark II at the time in Thunderbolts, he was trying to stay out of jail, so they disguised him as a black man. Since if you're looking for a white guy, that black dude's like not turning up on your radar.
I'm having all these flashbacks to like Gene Wilder and Silver Streak and stuff like that. This is like,
and then don't forget about the time that Lois Lane woke up Negro. Oh yeah, Lois Lane had a turn as a negress. And I only say these ridiculous things because that's how ridiculous it is. She started wearing dashikis and head wraps because, again, your personality completely changes when your skin tone changes. I know when I got this hairstyle, I was different.
Well, I bet Superman
I
couldn't
was
get
pumping
enough
the
of
black
that.
fist,
Well,
baby.
once you go black, you never go back.
Well,
That's been the source of their issues.
Superman was
ever
always
since.
shocked back in the 70s.
Well,
What?
Well, I put it in this aspect. When I started reading comics or getting comics when I was 5 years old, and technically the first comic book I ever got was that picture right there, is the Black Panther.
He's African, not
True,
African American.
true.
He's black,
Black, but he's
and
still
he's
black.
African.
Yeah, but in reading that, it was like, you know, especially a young kid, you say, "Whoa, this is interesting and surprising," and because you rarely saw that. And through the years, you know, you see again, still a majority of the characters are white, and until around the '80s, when I was really getting my supposed groove of buying comics, I see Jon Stewart as the Green Lantern, which was really surprising to me because you figure it's like, okay, Hal Jordan's going to be Green Lantern forever. But no, it changes and you see Jon Stewart and it was like, okay, another interesting thing. So as we grow older, and I just keep seeing it smaller and smaller, or better yet, none at all. Granted, you have Storm. Granted, you have Black Lightning. Granted, you have Black Lightning's daughter, Thunder, in there.
Both daughters.
Both daughters. And it's still not as growing as what you want it to be. I mean,
And no villains.
And no villains. And that's granted, except for one villain, Black Manta, which I don't know where that came about.
70s.
Because in the DC, there's a rule. If you have black
Yes.
before your name,
You have to be
you are black. I mean, we know this.
Black Racer suit is gray and blue, but he's a black man.
He's a black. You know, this was the rule of DC, and it has proliferated.
There was a survey in the 70s where, in the comic, they asked, what did you want to read? What issues did you want to read about? Like environmentalism, war, oil, all this other stuff. And one of the criteria for issues, black people.
As an issue, because we're
then-
problematic.
And that is like the time when Black Lightning came out afterwards.
Because everybody wants to read about black people.
And it's an issue involving everyone of the day.
I've got something funny to tell you guys. On Entertainment Weekly, a bunch of people got upset because Ryan Reynolds got cast as Green Lantern. And some people asked the question, well, isn't Green Lantern black, right? So people were saying, no, actually, there's many Green Lanterns. I was one of which. One guy actually wrote on the forum, no, Jon Stewart Green Lantern was created for the JLU comic book series and just to fill a quota because there were complaints there were no black characters. Comic book fans ripped him a new one. I mean, because this guy really thought he was kicking in some knowledge. Oh, yeah, Jon Stewart is a quota to be filled. It's like, no, dude, he came out in the 70s. You need to learn something about comics.
Well, same could be said about with when we saw the Super Friends cartoons, when we had Black Bolton and
well, it was supposed to be Black Lightning.
Black Lightning, granted, but you know,
they didn't want to pay him. So.
Yeah.
They didn't want to pay the creators.
Those
so.
licensing issues
Yes.
for DC.
But hold that thought, and we'll be right back. So now, please tell us just briefly a little bit about the history of this event.
Okay, in brief, the event began with Mr. Yumi Odom, who is our founder. The event started in 2002, and it was pretty much started kind of grassroots. The foundation was about community building, networking among artists and writers who were interested in creating comic books, but also the founding mission is youth literacy. And so today what you see at our convention 9 years later programs continuing that vision of youth literacy.
As a young man, I read comic books, but I rarely saw images of African Americans. I could often find images of Africans, but never were they flattering. They were always, almost without exception, they were people that you would not want to emulate, and certainly not who you'd want to encourage your children to be like. And as time goes on, I began to appreciate that it was very important to try to find more positive images of African Americans, or to help create or to publicize the creation of positive images of African Americans. And ECBOC, since its inception, and I'm very fortunate to have been one of the creators, has been about that. The number of people we have who come here and talk about their work, the number of venues we've inspired over the years. This has been 9 years we've been doing this. I'm very excited about this.
Now, please, I see that you're holding a copy of your book, Looking for a Face Like Mine. Tell us about that and why it's important.
This was a book that it was important for me to write. I speak about this topic all the time, and this was a collection of my essays, articles. I worked for several websites to give a chance to say something about our history and our past, and also where we're going. It's interesting that right now, in the year 2010, there are a number of people who are putting a great deal of money into films about comic books. So it is a recognized venue and a very important narrative form. I teach a course on graphic novels, and quite naturally, I'm still doing presentations about African Americans in comics.
Mr. Gerald Cooper with Envision Comics. Excuse me, Envision Comics. Did I say that right?
With an I. So it could be in the vision. Okay.
One of the things that impressed me as I was walking by is this fabulous illustration that you have of this character that you're doing behind you. Where do you hope to take the character, Mr. Cooper?
I hope to take the fans on a journey, okay, to show them that actual slavery is within your mind, and there's where we need to free ourselves. Because if you just have physical freedom, you can still be controlled by powers that you can't see. So if you can come out of how you've been conditioned to live, you can live the way that you were supposed to.
And is that the whole reason that you started doing the book?
Well, I'm also a comic fan, so there's several reasons. You know, I like to enjoy the enjoy, or you have to find another toy to employ.
Now, and you know, I don't want to seem sexist, but in all my experience with comics, I so rarely find, number one, women who are involved and women who are involved as the CEO or in some creative capacity. How did you get involved with comics and realize that this is what you wanted to do?
Well, I've been reading comics since I was a little girl. My father used to read the Sunday comics to me every weekend. My brother would bring home X-Men, Spider-Man. We played X-Men and Spider-Man video games, so I was inundated with comics since I was a baby. So it just became a part of me, and it just seemed natural to want to explore that outlet. And I never thought that I'm a woman, you know, I'm black. I just thought this is something that I like. This is something that's fun. When I was 10 years old, I called Marvel Comics. I called to speak to Jon R Jr. to say, I got concepts. I have concepts. I was put on hold, but that's okay. You know, look at me now. I'm here after all that perseverance, you know. But this time, instead of going to Marvel, I have my own little company, which I'm very proud of.
You know, with our convention, we make sure that the images that we see of people of African descent are in the forefront. And not only are they in the forefront, but they're worthy of emulation. They're worthy of reading about and looking into and getting to know. They're not just people that are the sidekick of another person's life. That's not what we have here. You know, when I tell people all the time, when I go to my family reunion, I'm not the sidekick. This is my family. My family doesn't have to sit in the back of its own family reunion, and that's what we do here. This is our family reunion. This is our gathering. We're in the forefront. We're not the sidekicks.
Baltimore Comic Convention talking to veteran comic artist Kyle Baker. Thanks for joining us today, Mr. Baker.
Thank you.
Now, I've enjoyed your work for a number of years. I think that it's been some remarkably groundbreaking type of work that you've done. In fact, there was a comic series on Nat Turner that you did. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, well, it was the true story of the Turner Rebellion, and I'm going to get the year wrong, but it was when slavery was still around. This was the first successful, well, not, it was the first sort of successful slave revolt. They caught the guy and he got killed, but it's widely considered a major moment in history because it inspired other people, such as Harriet Tubman and Malcolm X and Frederick. All these people got their inspiration from Nat Turner. So even though he got killed, he's in all the history books, but very little is written about him. So I said, wow, what a great opportunity. You know, it's rare that you have somebody who's that famous that nobody knows anything about. So that's why I wrote the book. And now it's at Harry Abrams. I published it myself at first, and because I thought I had just quit DC Comics and Marvel Comics, and I thought, you know, that it would be great to write a book about a guy who quit being a slave, since I had just quit being a slave.
There was another piece of work that you did called The Truth that I thought was also particularly groundbreaking. It seems as if you have been one of those talents who has worked on particular projects involving African Americans. Tell us a little bit about The Truth.
It was based on the idea that Captain America, and I didn't write it. A friend of mine wrote it. Captain America got his superpowers from. He was a soldier in World War II who was given a serum, a medical serum that gave him superpowers, and that's how he became Captain America. And so my friend, who said that would have to be the first time that the Army experimented on a white soldier. So he made the story more like the Tuskegee experiment. Like, so our story was about the guy that they tested this serum on. So he became the original Captain America, and it was a fun story.
Well, what are you working on?
Every generation has their war comedy. You have your Catch-22 and your MASH, and we don't have one yet for Iraq. So it was inspired by, true stories of just. I mean, I thought it would make a good comedy because there's just rampant incompetence in this war, and because nobody wants to join. Because 4,000 dead soldiers cuts down on your recruiting. They've had to lower the standards for recruiting, and there have been a lot of improprieties. And I read a story in the paper where they actually recruited an autistic kid, and they wouldn't let him out. The parents put up a fight. They said the guy's autistic, but he passed the written exam. He passed the physical. He's 18 and he volunteered. They'll take anybody. They'll take felons. So my comedy is that, it's a platoon made up of, felons and an autistic guy. Because the funny thing about autistic people, because I work with autistic kids, I thought, except for the fighting thing, this guy would make the best soldier. Because autistic people love repetition. They love being told what to do. They like a routine. They're very orderly. Everything has to be in the right place. If you ever saw Rain Man, so his bunk would be clean, his foot locker would be spotless, his gun, he'd probably enjoy taking the gun apart and cleaning it and putting it back together. He'd be a great soldier, except for that one thing of not being able to fight. Yeah, that one little thing, yeah, except that he'd get killed. But in my story, he doesn't get killed. He's the hero of the story and always saves the day, yeah.
Mark! Anna! Ooh! Hey! Forgot your lunch. Hey!
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Because kids in foster care don't need perfection. They need you.
Well, we're back, and we're talking about African Americans and their portrayals in American comics. And at the end, towards the end of the last segment, I just want to revisit this because Sherin, you mentioned how there was a fan who wrote in thinking that he had some knowledge about
Yes.
quotas. All right.
Yes.
And I thought that was interesting because even though Jon Stewart sort of came along in the 70s, I thought, well, because he was the alternate Green Lantern, for those of you who don't know. And when something would happen to Hal Jordan and he was incapacitated or otherwise unable to fulfill his role as Green Lantern, Jon Stewart would step up. It's sort of like being first runner-up at the Miss America
He's
pageant.
the red shirt lantern.
Exactly. But I thought it was kind of interesting, the whole notion of quotas, because I always felt that the whole reason that the Jon Stewart character was created was DC was sort of groping for the African American audience, because African Americans have always been, I think, disproportionate comic readers, very patriotic for the most part, very conservative. Even
Yes,
though,
that's true.
we might have been somewhat disenfranchised from society, for whatever reason, we're just very loving and forgiving people, and we keep coming along here, and
We are the world.
But I remember in the Avengers, it was, I'm trying to remember exactly when, I think it was mid to late 70s, and the government was sort of stepping in because the Avengers have this A1 priority clearance that allows them to operate freely. And due to certain security constraints and concerns on the part of the government kind of stepped in and they said, look, we're going to control you guys' roster for a while. Okay. We're going to pare you down to 7 core members. You may call in additional members depending on need. However, we're going to set your core membership. And I remember they called off the roster, because Iron Man was the chairman at the time, and they're like, oh, remaining as chairman, Iron Man, and Captain America was in it, and they ran off a couple other people. Hawkeye had just come back to the team, and the last person they called out was the Falcon, and Hawkeye was like, what? Because the Falcon hadn't even been in the Avengers. But it was so funny. They said, well, part of operating under this government charter requires equal opportunity for minorities. And so the Black Panther was unavailable, and we needed...
He was ruling the kingdom, He wasn't doing nothing much. He was just running the whole country.
Basically needed to fill this quota. And so the Falcon, and I remember it was so funny because Captain America went to him later because, they had been partnered up. And, Falcon's like, well, wait a minute, I don't know how I feel about this, Come on, Sam, we need you. We gotta have a Cullen in the team.
A Cullen. We need melanin enrichment. But and then Marvel goes and does something as crazy as, oh, I know what we'll do. Storm and Black Panther, they're both from Africa. It's not like not like it's a whole continent. They're African. Let's make them marry.
It's just
then
a little
they went and changed their backstories, and you're like, what the heck?
Well, but apparently they had known each other as younger people.
Yeah,
I mean,
in the what do we call that? Retcon.
Yes.
Imagine that.
Princess on the street. They retconned the whole thing, and it's just like you did all of that just so you could match your Negroes. I'm sorry. That's when I scoff, I go to Negro. So y'all forgive me. But when I begin to scoff, because that's what I think they think. It's like, oh, they're black.
Well, the thing is, it's like you're trying we're trying to group them together and figure it's like, okay, this, and if you're thinking how money making works, it's like, okay, these are, as far as we see it, the 2 most popular black characters we got. Let's bring them together. The black folks will read it. They'll love it, blah, blah, blah.
Because you got Eric Jerome Dick Eater, right?
Right. Add that on there.
Okay. Well, how come they never decided that they were gonna make Mary Jane and Jean Grey get married? They're the 2 most popular redhead characters. I don't understand.
That's another show.
Well,
just help me understand the logic.
If we're trying to get the gay, lesbian, and transgendered audience, then maybe that's the way you go.
They might go that way.
They may yet do
but
that.
I'll tell you something that I love. Unwittingly, because I don't think they did this on purpose, but with Justice League, the animated series, which became Justice League Unlimited, we all know that Lex Luthor is a brother. I mean, just inherently, I understand that the voice is not black, but the mannerisms, the style, the lips, I know he's supposed to be Telly Savalas, but that's okay. I mean, don't you guys all feel that way?
I kind of feel that it's the fact that he comes off very, very thuggish.
No, No, he
well,
doesn't.
he does.
He's not thuggish at all. He's elegant.
He's elegant, but there's an elegant thug to it. He's just like, he comes off, he's sort of like, it's smooth and suave, but then again, it's like, I will cut you.
He's got black man swagger. That's what you're saying.
Pretty
right?
much, yeah.
Lex Luthor on the animated series has black man swagger, and I think comic book folk, if you want to make a black villain, look to that, because that's how you do it. It's not they just happen to be black. Am I right? It's not that black is like somehow we're all different. Black people don't come in like a set box where we all like chicken. There's actually some black people that hate chicken. Surprise! One of my best friends hates watermelon.
I can't play basketball.
Okay, and I cannot sing. So, black is it's flavoring. It's not the whole. It's not the. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Black people come in every conceivable personality, shape, and form. You do not have to write us according to some shtick, and our pants are sagging, and we're listening to hip hop. That is not. There's nothing wrong with it. That's just not all that we are.
Stereoteps.
Well, let's
put
it this way.
And unfortunately, a lot of the comic companies have. No, I'm sorry. Were you going to say?
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say. Unfortunately, a lot of the comic companies have bought into these stereotypes, and not just stereotypes of African Americans, but stereotypes of a number of different types of groups.
Yeah.
Especially Native Americans.
Right.
Yes. Oh, that could be a whole nother show. Oh.
But there's also, let's say there was a time in, if I remember, the mid '90s, and this is where the birth of Static Shock came about. There was a group, there was like a group of set of black-oriented comic books.
Icon.
Yeah,
Milestone.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was
and
Milestone
it was like where you were going with, you're going to after, okay, we got to go take it back to the streets, and that's where you saw some of these characters from. Granted, Static Shock came out, and he was, because he was he was young, he was different, and granted with the TV show, kind of helped him, sort of like made him more mainstream, more friendly. But I kind of grew to him because of the fact of, not just because it's static powers, but I just got the sense that he was something where I think a lot of kids can learn and grow, and he can see a little bit more and relate to.
These are real black kids.
Right.
Like, it's Dennis Cohen, and then you have Dwayne McDuffie, who was a member of Milestone. Yeah, and I think that's a part of the reason why Jon Stewart on Justice League Unlimited was written so well. You have Dwayne McDuffie writing him as a real black man. Not and this is not all black men. This is this specific one. And I think that Milestone was great. My mother bought Milestone comics for us. Isn't she fabulous?
Absolutely.
And
that Blood Syndicate, that's
I read Blood Syndicate. I read Icon. I read Static.
Icon and Static were like the best.
Well, I hate to cut us off, but I know we could keep going on
this.
And,
they're cutting the brothers, man. That ain't right, man. This is not right.
I think this show was about 5 minutes shorter than when we got white people on here. That's what I think.
Thank you very much for having joined us. Please come back. We're not always quite so radical.
This ain't radical. If y'all think this is radical, you're in trouble. And now we lose our Olympic medals.
Peace out.
Our Olympic medals are gone.
Exciting episode of Fantastic Four.
There'll be white people.